Am I the only one who's noticing Jean-Paul seems to be frozen?
No, I noticed it too.
I just don't want to rush the. Am I the only one who's noticing?
No video popped out. Like, we're not in the room.
Okay, that's odd. Right on time, I got kicked out. Anyway,
But do you have any last words? You're gonna put your contact info in the thread and stuff like that.
yes, I definitely will. But what I was going to say is I kicked out depression, and sometimes she sends her nosy sister anxiety to see if the waters are warm, and I don't allow them in. So you can do the work. And I think I have put it into the chat before, but I'll put it again. All my links are at bypaulmark.com, so I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, can you speak that just a little bit more slowly though? Because for people
Okay.
that are listening to the video later.
Okay, so all of my links are at by Paulmark, PAULMARQ.com.
Okay, great. Thank you so much and welcome, AJ. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Leo. And thank you so much, Paul Mark, for sharing all your beautiful gifts with us. You're such an incredible, inspirational human. And I hope to hear you speak again sometime soon and maybe cross paths in the real world and work together in some capacity or be in the same spaces. It sounds like you're doing incredible things in your community. So thank you so much for sharing with us. It's really inspirational.
Oh, thank you so much, AJ. And definitely reach out.
Yeah, no, for sure. And thank you for Leo and all the organizers for putting this on. I know it couldn't have been easy. Lots of kittens to herd, I'm sure, with organizing this many speakers. So thank you for all the work that you're doing and for everyone that is showing up and has showed up. So, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is AJ Wilder, and I am calling from Vancouver Island, Canada, from the unceded stolen lands of the Cowichan Nation. And I've been in this field for quite some time, um, both as on my personal journeys and in a professional way. And I like to say that I've been blessed with colonial education in this field and mentorship, especially under some amazing, brilliant Indigenous medicine keepers and traditional medicine keepers. So my formalized background is in social work and counseling, in trauma counseling and coaching, and expanded in the last few years into psychedelic integration and preparation and ceremonies and lots of different coaching. I also do a lot in spaces around equity and inclusion and diversity, especially psychedelic spaces. I think for me, the passion of my work has come from my own personal experience of being in a lot of medicine spaces that aren't safe for me, and didn't feel like I was surrounded by a lot of my peers in general, just from an optics perspective, but just from an experience perspective, and just a lack of understanding for folks on how to create those accountable spaces for diverse folks. So, a real passion for mine I've been in the Jedi field, the DEI field for a long time. I started off doing more nonprofit and corporate stuff, and now I've kind of integrated into the psychedelic fields, because I think it's important for me to be able to help folks share their experiences and help folks that don't have those experiences make sure their spaces are as safe as possible. As Paul Mark has shared with us, we can't always guarantee that spaces are going to be 100% space safe, because my experience is not your experience. And you could say a space is safe, and I could say it's absolutely not. Um, I love the term accountable space. Brave space is good too, but I like accountable space in a space that we can all take accountability and have open dialogue and be supportive of each other and share our lived experiences and have empathy and understanding that we all have different lived experiences. But not only do the learning to ensure that we're showing up for each other, but I think a big part of my journey has been a lot of unlearning, a lot of unlearning the garbage that we learn in our colonial, oppressive structures that aren't built to serve a lot of us. So that's a big passion for me, is to um, work on creating those spaces, helping to create those spaces, and create more specific spaces for queer and trans folk, because they don't exist very often. I don't come across them very often, and so when I get opportunities like this, I'm super excited to connect with folks that are doing such incredible work. It just really fires me up to know that there's lots of us warriors on the front line, and behind the scenes doing this work. It's really awesome. It totally like fuels my fire and keeps me going, because I think as a non-binary person, a queer non-binary neurodivergent person, I'm quite often um, feel alone in spaces. I'm quite often alone, in cis het spaces a lot, cis het neurotypical spaces where there's not always a lot of understanding, and it's not set up, necessarily for people to feel safe to express themselves, right? And I think, especially in medicine spaces, it's so integral that we have spaces that are queer and trans centered, because to be able to do that deep inner work and to land and to really unpack well under the medicine, that's going to require a degree of trust and having, at least a few other practitioners, medicine keepers in those spaces that you can identify with. Doesn't have to be the same experience that you have, but has to have some level of understanding, is just going to allow you to take the depth of that journey even further. And it's going to allow the medicine to do its work. Yeah, so part of my work also is I really believe in group settings. So I'm trained in group models up here in Canada. I don't know what it's like. I do know some things around legislation stuff in America, but I can speak to Canada. So for us up here in the north, ketamine is the only real medicine that's above board. However, currently they're doing special exceptions for medicines like MDMA, psilocybin, and those are for specific things around end of life care. They're starting to do special exceptions with resistant treatment depression and PTSD. However, we kind of have this loophole, which is where I've had the opportunity to work in the harm reduction model. So the way that works is if basically like the special exceptions, you can say a client or you can say folks have kind of tried other things, they're not working, and kind of the idea behind it is they're going to seek the medicine regardless, that you want to create that supervised space for them to land. And so as a practitioner, for example, in groups that I've worked in, when we're doing group therapy, we I've worked in the 12-week program. So I've trained under a few different agencies. One, Roots to Thrive. So they started off initially a ketamine-based medicine provider, and they integrate kind of the medical model, but also using a lot of indigenous principles. So we have indigenous elders on site. We do ceremony. It's not held in a hospital. It's held in a community center. And so It's a 12-week program that runs. So we do 12 weeks, so 6 weeks of integration. Then we have different medicine sits, and then we do 6 weeks of integration afterwards. Because for me, integration is so necessary, and the difference between, I think, the really deep impact. Like medicine can have a huge, profound impact. You know, if you're doing medicine on your own, I don't usually recommend it, although we all have our own journeys. But when I've seen folks have access to integration, it's so vital. And for some folks, yeah, I think River talked about this. Obviously, any of the programs that I've worked with, we recommend that people have access to a counselor or therapist whilst doing programs, but some folks don't have the luxury of that. Some folks don't have benefits. Some folks are on a wait list. Some folks don't have money, right? So we try to integrate community-based integration programs so that we can connect them to groups as well after they're done with our integration programs to make sure they're still connecting in therapeutic circles, so that they're getting the most out of those medicine journeys as possible. And I work also with another group up here in Canada that we work in the harm reduction model called gathering groups, and we do psilocybin therapy. And it's quite intense and quite powerful, but we do the 12-week model. And same thing, we like to make sure that we have people that are connected to supports and connected to integration circles as much as possible. So the other passion of mine is like we talked about, is creating spaces that are accessible. I think that's a huge barrier we're seeing here in the industry, is lack of accessibility. You know, I don't know what it's like in America, but up in Canada, when you look at a lot of these programs, you're looking at $4,000 to $8,000, sometimes more. It's not accessible. It's not attainable, and it's not affordable. And healing should be accessible to everyone. And you know, there is minimal scholarship programs, but few and far between. And so that's a big endeavor that I'm part of as well, is trying to work with individuals to generate scholarships for folks in these spaces, especially LGBTQ2S+ folks, gender nonconforming folks, BIPOC folks, trans or and Indigenous folks. Just seeing a comment. US, it's white dominated and excessively costly. Yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask you folks, it hasn't taken here. I know a colleague of mine is working on a project. Some US companies are starting to integrate it into their benefits. Is that true? Does anybody have knowledge of that or can speak to that? That it's starting to integrate into some medical benefits programs in regards to psychedelic therapy? Nope, nobody? That's okay. Um, it's pretty far with that reach here. It is not. One thing that's I do appreciate about Canada is someone's waiting in the waiting room. Damn. That we have a lot of funding, well, a decent amount of funding, especially for Indigenous folks. So that has been a group that I've been really blessed to be able to work with as far as funding goes. And so we've been able to, I've been able to be a part as a non-Indigenous person, some pretty really cool and community-based endeavors with Indigenous communities as a what do you want to call it? Pilot projects for reconciliation up here in Canada. So these test projects are given to Indigenous communities. AJ, how can you contact me? I'll put all that stuff in the chat when I am done, unless people want to know. And please engage. Anything you folks want to say, any questions that come up or any chats that want to, you know, I'd love to know what's on your mind and what you folks what your experiences are in these realms. yeah, so there's some really cool, I'll put some resources in the chat as well. Some of the groups that I've worked with, some Indigenous groups. Um, Sacred Circle is one, working with some nations that are bringing um, plant medicine back to their communities. I mean, plant medicine has been in their communities for a long time, especially when they look in their lineages, but bringing it back and getting funding to do work with their elders, to do work with residential school survivors. Excuse me. So I've been really blessed to be able to be part of these teachings, and to be able to sit in some of these circles. And so a lot of the indigenous principles of reciprocity and connectedness to the earth and the medicine has really become essential in my teachings. And I try and integrate that as much as possible in the most culturally appropriate way, being that obviously I'm a settler and living on stolen land. And so I think as far as the trans experience goes, I've been really welcomed into Indigenous communities, and have felt more seen in Indigenous communities than I have in the more colonial cis het white communities. And so that's kind of the path that I've been led down in lots of ways as well, which has been really exciting. Yeah, I just wanted to check in with folks to see.
Right now, we really breathing. Is it awesome now?
So
It's just me.
someone's mic is unmuted. I don't know if they were trying to talk.
I don't think so. I think that person was just unmuted for some reason. So folks, keep yourselves muted unless you're actually talking or answering a question or something. But I was gonna say that I can resonate with what you said because I was about, I don't know, early 20s. I was a single mom and I started working with this cultural-based counseling program, and it was the first of its kind at Daybreak Star in Seattle
Mhm.
at United Indians. And my mentor is a Chippewa elder that started that whole program and wrote for Makah tribe and wrote for Snohomish tribe and Snoqualmie tribe. And he was like the groundbreaking person to write all the cultural based curriculum, which was
Yeah,
using music and connection with the land and all this other stuff that for me was much more helpful for these fucking children and their families than
yeah.
the Western like bullshit. And so as a licensed therapist, I really just found my like, I don't know, tribe. It sounds corny, but I never felt excluded from the Native community. And my dad's like a small part Native American, but like it's not enough to really feel that consequential. But for whatever reason, even recently, I had a cousin that passed away from a fentanyl overdose.
Mhm.
And the head of the Duwamish tribe gave us the longhouse for free, and we were low on money, so it worked out great. It was amazing, but it also was such an honor. And then we had a native elder who's really well respected in the community come and do the service for my cousin. And I don't know, I feel like that community has been so loving to me and so accepting. So I just, everything you said, I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't often talk about it because to be
Mhm.
honest, it sounds a little bit hokey, like running with wolves or something, like you think you're fucking native or some shit. But I do feel like those have been the most welcoming and loving people to me in this world. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. Um, yeah, and obviously speaking from a white settler perspective, I don't think it's hokey. I think River talked about this before, talking about the medicine keepers that are from indigenous communities, right? Especially we look at medicine keepers from Central America, South America, and it's interesting up here in Canada. One thing I'm finding, I don't know what the vibe is in America, but there's almost this clash of the medical model versus like traditional medicine keepers, right? There's this clash. It's like, and actually, I was at the MAPS conference in Colorado in 2023, and that was a big issue that came up is there was a protest at the end of the end of the conference in front of everybody, in front of 15,000 people, from a group of indigenous folks that was really really upset that, there was a lot of things happening. It was really upset that they weren't consulted in a lot of the talks that were happening, that they didn't feel like they were respected, and also talking about some of the medicines that were being used in a culturally appropriating way that shouldn't be actually touched, right? That are not ours to touch, that are not ours to use. And so, it's interesting trying to navigate that as a non-Indigenous person, how to find the way of, being a clinical counselor or being a clinical social worker, and, being in spaces that do require this degree of a certain, accolade, but also not prescribing to a lot of the colonial bullshit, if we're being honest. And I think in the last few years have really kind of stepped away from the more clinical, the more colonial settings. I don't really want anything to do with them anymore. And so for me, it's been about my own journeys really, and finding my own, yeah, finding where the medicine leads me. And it's led me to some pretty incredible places, to learn from some pretty incredible elders and some pretty incredible medicine keepers. So I think for me now, it's trying to figure out what direction my practice will take with that. So how do I use that knowledge and information and infiltrate it into my practice in the most culturally appropriate way? And so I feel very called um to learn more in depth, from more cultural teachers. So my medicines that I've worked with for the last 20 years have been psilocybin, MDMA, and LSD. um, I've just started in the last couple years working with San Pedro, but I really, really want to, kind of learn those teachings more. And I think, um, you know, River was sharing a little bit, and I'd love to connect with them more. I think San Pedro, in my experiences, has such beautiful possibilities to really create connection in the queer community. So I'm not sure, do many folks here have experience in with San Pedro in circles, for healing within the queer community? What has been your experiences with that, if anybody?
San Pedro, anyone? I don't know if I've done San Pedro, to be honest. Can you describe for folks what it is so that maybe they can have an orientation?
Yes, and I will describe in my limited knowledge. So if anybody else has more in-depth knowledge, please take over. San Pedro is a cactus medicine. Um, and I've heard it described as San Pedro and ayahuasca are like fraternal twins. And ayahuasca is the fiery twin who, how did someone say it earlier? Has its own agenda. Kind of where you want to go, doesn't matter. Ayahuasca is going to take you where you want to go. San Pedro is much more gentle in its approach, but it's really a deep heart medicine from what I found. It's like heart opening and really a beautiful, profound connected medicine, which is really cool. Um, that's a medicine I'm looking to learn more about and to integrate. But, I think for me, this experience here speaking was to come and meet folks from all over the world. I always like to connect and see what's happening and what folks are doing. And I think, it feels quite lonely sometimes, and a bit of a disparity as a trans practitioner in these spaces. I often feel, um, what other names does San Pedro go by? Wachuma. Wachuma is the other name. So Wachuma San Pedro. Thanks for that question. Um, Also known as Jaguar medicine. That's what it goes by a lot as well. Jaguar medicine. Um, yeah, so I'm just wondering, yeah, what if I don't know who's on the call here. Seems to be a quiet bunch, but any folks are the good practitioners for that? Is that question for me, Leo? Again, so learning about that. It sounds like River. River sounds like I was asking on their talk what their medicine was that they had facilitated, and they had talked about Wachuma. Wachuma is one of the medicines that they had utilized when working with that group of trans women, which is really, really exciting. One of the visions that I have, I've had the opportunity to work with an incredible Indigenous elder. Yeah, River does seem like an amazing practitioner. An incredible Indigenous elder, originally from the Blackfeet Nation, but has been living up in Canada for the last, I think, 30 years, up in an area of British Columbia where I'm from, called the Okanagan. Him and his wife are Wachuma uh, medicine keepers. It's not, I don't think it's not a traditional medicine from his nation, but it was gifted, teachings were gifted to him through some other teachers. But they hold a circle, a community-based circle where they pass a feather and they share, and it's one of the most impactful community connection medicine sits I've ever been in my life. And the last time I was sitting in medicine with them, I really had an epiphany that I felt like this is a medicine that could be super duper healing for the queer community, the queer and trans community. I find being in this community, there's a lot of fragmentation. I don't know what other people have experienced. And there's a lot of trauma, obviously. Folks have talked about that today. I think a lot of us come to the healing fields for earnest reasons. And I think we bring our familiar trauma, our childhood trauma, or other things can happen, but also um, I think the simple fact of identifying as queer trans is innate trauma, not because there should be, but because of society, how society views us and tells us that we're wrong and tells us that we shouldn't exist and tells us that we should be, you know, wiped out. And we hear this on the daily. So, I can't imagine. I can think of my own experiences, but for everyone else, how that affects how people walk through the world on the daily basis. And I've experienced in a lot of queer and trans circles because of that trauma, a lot of animosity towards each other, which is really hard. And coming into circles where you have familiarity and you want to have community, and there's a lot of toxicity. I've seen that happen a lot, and I've had to remove myself from a lot of queer spaces because of that. And it's understandable based on what people are bringing in. But I'd love to be able to, one of my visions is to create retreats for folks to be able to work through some of this systemic trauma, this universal trauma, excuse me, and their own personal trauma. And I'd love to create a network of other medicine keepers that we can work together to do this. So that's one of the visions that I have in my practice and something that I'm working on up here. Michelle said, gatekeeping. Abso-freaking-lutely. Gatekeeping in general for everything in our society. Have I tried acacia and Sinian? No. Can you speak a little bit more to that, Leo?
Yeah, no, I was curious why you had said the other medicine, the Wachuma, might be helpful for healing the divisiveness of the queer community, but I just was curious if you did try acacia and Syrian rue together with a practitioner that you felt good about. I just kind of had a feeling like I wonder if you did that, if you would then maybe want to also add that to that group of medicines that you were talking about to heal the fractioned queer community. Because for me, that
Mhm.
had that was like just like a really holy experience. And yeah, so I don't really have words for it, but I just was curious.
I'm not actually much familiar with those medicines. Are they're plant, what are they? Are they cactus medicines? Are they plant-based medicines? What? Yeah.
Acacia wood is my understanding is like what Moses was high on when he saw the burning bush is the theory. And
Yeah.
acacia was used in like Jewish ritual and
Yeah.
magic, but but you definitely, it has a hallucinogenic effect.
Yeah.
My understanding is it was only the holy people, only the priests and the royalty within the Egyptian household that were allowed to use the acacia. That's how Moses would have been exposed to it. The Syrian rue, I don't know. I'm spacing on, it's not a cactus, but I don't know if it's a reed or something. But they work in tandem, kind of like how people talk about ayahuasca
Yeah.
working in tandem with other plant medicines.
Yeah. No, interesting. I'd love more information on that. The one thing, one of the things I love about psychedelics and plant medicine is, I think everyone has their medicines that are drawn to and have worked with. In my experience, every time I try new medicines, not every time, but mostly, I really get pumped about that new medicine, and it just really opens up something different. I think that's what's incredible about these medicines is that they all do so many different things and can open up so many different parts of us. So no, I'm always open to be to learn about different medicines. And yeah, no, I don't know. I think for me, Wachuma is a recent medicine. I actually haven't worked much with ayahuasca as well. I don't necessarily think it's my medicine to work with, but I think it could be a medicine that I support others in um sharing. Um I think the other thing I'm super duper cognizant and passionate about is um the lack of accessibility for training for diverse practitioners. That's something I've found, like I'd said earlier, a lot of programs that exist. So I myself, I took the psychedelic assisted therapy program up here uh, in Vancouver Island. So we had the first ever. It's at Vancouver Island University. Randomly enough, small town up here in Canada. We had the first accredited psychedelic assisted therapy program. So I graduated that. It's a postmaster's program a few years ago, and the program was not cheap. It was not cheap. There was no scholarships. Um, yeah, it's so prohibitively costly. The only reason I was even able to take this program is went through an associate, or I went through a divorce, and I had some stuff from my divorce, so I had to use that to pay for this. But yeah, programs themselves is so costly. Yeah, I saw somebody say MAPS is so costly. Are we talking about MAPS, the conferences, or MAPS in general? I mean, MAPS in general, it's funny, is very costly. I think a lot of these colonial programs that exists are costly. I actually sit, so this is great information because another hat that I wear is I sit on the MAPS Canada Jedi Council. So the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Council. So there's a MAPS Jedi US, but I'm on the MAPS Jedi Canada. And MAPS Canada is a lot different from MAPS US. MAPS Canada is like the broke younger sibling of we're a nonprofit. We don't really have money, and we're more advocacy based. We don't really do a lot of we don't organize big conferences, and we don't, anybody that was at Denver a few years ago, that MAPS is a bit baller, and so yeah, we've had lots of conversations with them about how their programming isn't accessible. I've been lucky to work a little bit with their diversity inclusion officer, Stephen Huang, who's an amazing person, and he recognizes that it's totally unreachable. You reached out to a friend. Yeah, I'm not surprised, and that's not okay. Can I ask, was the scholarship for a conference that you reached out for, Michelle? Not that it matters. I mean,
It was for a training that they had upcoming, and Juliana, I believe, who might have been here earlier,
yeah,
because she gave me this information to attend this phenomenal offering.
yeah,
Yeah, and we were talking, and she was saying, that she was in need of getting the more the paper than anything
yeah,
to support her studies as a social worker, and
yeah.
they never responded.
Yeah, that's not okay, and that makes me quite angry. And and yeah, feel free if I'll put my contact information, and I'd love for you to send me some more information. Not that I don't have that much pull, I'll be honest, but these are things though that I can bring up at that level, and when I'm talking to Maps Canada to say these are things that are happening, we need to know, especially as part of the Jedi Council, right? That's part of my work is what do I need to advocate for at a systemic level that's not working? And clearly, this is a major thing that's not working. People aren't able um, to get access to training. So it's kind of that catch-22. Diverse practitioners aren't able to access training, and then we have medicine keepers. We don't have enough diverse medicine keepers. We don't have enough diverse coaches. We don't have enough diverse counselors because they can't get access to the training because it's so elitist and it's so costly. There is a really good, Michelle, I'm not sure if you're aware of a organization called Alchemy. Do you know them? They're out of the Bay Area. Have you heard of them before? Has anybody heard of Alchemy? Um,
Yeah, I believe I saw them, especially around COVID time,
yeah,
a lot of
Alchemy is
online.
it's they mostly do ketamine stuff, but I think they're starting to expand. But I know that they do subsidized training, especially for the queer and trans community and for the BIPOC community. So it's run by a really brilliant woman. Well, I can't remember. Deidre Brown is the director, and Dr. Kula is their clinical director, and they're both from what I remember, queer women of color. And so their kind of main principle is we serve, the Black community, we serve the queer community, and we want to make sure that we're diversifying practitioners, and we want to make sure that we're offering training that is accessible to folks. We want to train more BIPOC practitioners. We want to train more LGBTQ2S+ practitioners. They also offer sliding scale medicine to folks that can't afford it, to the unhoused, to street and trench folks, to folks struggling with addiction. They're one of the programs I was very impressed with the things that they're doing, and the model that they follow is really amazing. So yeah, that's one agency that I know in America that's doing really cool stuff is Alchemy, for sure. I think there's a lot of gaps in our systems, right? A lot of gaps. I do a lot of work up here with an amazing non-binary practitioner who's been working in the industry for a long time, and they run a program called School of Reverence, and I do facilitating with them, and I will put that in. I'll put all these things that I mentioned in, and sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. And School of Reverence, we do integration for queer and trans folks. We do sliding scale stuff. We do a module-based year-long program that runs people through things like connecting to self again, and self-compassion. And yeah, and we also work a lot with people that struggle with chronic pain, people that are chronically ill, because that's a huge gap in our medical system as well, right? Folks that are on disability, and folks that struggle to make ends meet. They can't access proper resources, especially anything to do with plant medicine or integration. So that's a program that I also work with as well. Seems like some folks are having trouble connecting, hey? I did send the link out to a few people. Can someone give a direct invite? Is it just the Zoom link that's not working, Leo?
I
Ableism.
think for some reason people are getting an error message, and I'm like a total conspiracy theorist. I'm always imagining that I'm on a government list because I totally know that I am, and I try to ignore it. But in moments like this where like 5 people are like, I can't get in, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it works for some people. So I just was wondering if someone could directly do an invite from the Zoom itself, but it's totally fine if it's too much. Like I'm sure it'll get sorted out. So just
Yeah. No, I don't think you're a conspiracy theorist. So I'm sure a lot of us here are on the shit list on multiple governments in multiple countries. I know I'm pretty sure I am. And Zoom is one of those platforms that's interesting that is very
So
yeah.
you will get an error message if you try to go directly through Zoom, but if you copy the link and put it into a browser, it'll ask you to open Zoom and then you can
Oh,
get in.
okay. Right. So if you take the roundabout way, it's easier.
It's
Okay.
the scenic route.
That's okay. We'll take the scenic route. That's all
Mhm.
right. Thanks for sharing that. Appreciate that.
Sometimes the universe tests you to make sure you really want it.
Right? I think that's absolutely correct, right? Sometimes we have to slow down and smell the roses a little bit, I think, which is tough because we're a very fast-paced. We want it now, right? And that's a great transition because that's one of the lessons I've learned from plant medicine, from psychedelics, is there's no fast track to healing. It's you got to take the scenic route, and sometimes you don't even really know where you're going, and sometimes you don't. It's like I think of it like being on a, you get to one of those bus exchanges, and we've all taken the wrong bus a few times, and you're like, I have no idea which bus I'm on, and I have no idea where I'm going. I've had that with plant medicine and with psychedelics a few times. It's like I don't remember getting on this bus, but here I am on this bus, and I'm along for the ride, and usually, um, I end up at a beautiful place. Sometimes it can be a little dodgy throughout the journey, but it always ends at a real beautiful place. And I love that about medicine, about working with medicine is one of the things we do when I'm facilitating groups is we tend to encourage people to not set too like narrow of an intention because a lot of the medicines that you're working with don't care. They do. They have compassion for you, but I usually like to say when I'm setting my intention is kind of wherever the medicine wants to take me. Because I've had some pretty big curveballs come up. But they're usually things I never knew that I needed and things that have kind of been tucked away. But that's from working a lot with psilocybin. And psilocybin is one of those medicines for sure. I heard someone speak earlier that it's I don't want to say it's not a beginner medicine. I don't, well, it's not really a beginner medicine, but it's one of those things that it definitely takes you where it wants to take you. Um, yeah. Sorry, I was just reading it through the chat.
It depends on the size of the dose.
Yeah.
So, and and one of the things when we're talking about psilocybin or mushrooms is people will say, "Oh, I've done shrooms." The first question I ask is, "How much of what?"
Right.
And a lot of people cannot answer that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. I remember talking with somebody recently and we were talking about strains and they're like, wait a second. There's multiple different kinds of like psilocybin. I was like, yes, multiple different times, multiple different kinds. And, I think multiple different ways. And yeah, no, I love that. It's like you know, I think one of the things that we're seeing that I find kind of problematic is, and I don't know what you folks have seen lately, is this whole um thing to do the heroic dose. Like I'm gonna do the heroic dose of psilocybin.
No such thing.
Yeah, well, a lot of people like to think there is, right? And a lot of people like to think a lot of people think that they this is something that they want to navigate on their own for some reason, and I have no idea why. Um, but it can be quite damaging. And
It's not safe, definitely.
no, definitely not. And I don't know what it's like for you folks too. One of the things that's happening up here in Canada is we're in this really gray area with legalities, and a lot of psilocybin dispensaries are popping up. And it's quite problematic because you can go into a psilocybin dispensary and kind of get anything at any time, and a lot of it is not dispensed in a good way. You know, I went into a dispensary like last year just to check it out. I never buy anything from dispensaries. I obviously have growers that I work with, but it was just like I felt like I was at a rave. There's like techno music playing, and they were selling, you know, mushroom fizzy drinks, and it didn't even have like it had the dosage, but it didn't even have what strain was on there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is problematic, you know, that we're taking this beautiful sacred plant medicine that is medicine, and you know, making it a party. And yeah,
So are you guys calling them strains up there? Because it's always been strains with marijuana, types with mushrooms. So I've heard you say strain multiple times. Is that intentional?
yeah, I think it's both. I think it's just language, strains, types for sure. I think it's yeah, just yeah, maybe just a language thing um for up here. But yeah, you know, yeah, and it's probably more common that strains are more with marijuana, but yeah, I mean, I've heard both kind of used, strains and types for psilocybin. Um, yeah. So I'm interested to know what is the legalities down there around psilocybin? Do you guys have dispensaries? What does that, is it state to state? Is it how, yeah, what has people's experience been with stuff like that?
So I think Michigan is decriminalized, or parts of Michigan, Detroit area, Massachusetts has it on the ballot right now for legalization, I think. Yeah, nothing so far in Washington other than decriminalization about 4 key cities.
Yeah.
And then Oregon legalized, and then Colorado has decriminalized and legalized.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's pretty I mean, it's gray area here, but it's interesting for being gray area. Mostly where I'm from, like in the province that I'm from, I could go get it in multiple places, not a problem. And it was the same for the marijuana dispensaries for a long time. And now marijuana is completely, dispensaries are everywhere and they're legal. So yeah, I just wanted to, you know, it's 6:49, so I wanted to open it up to anybody that wanted to ask any questions or wanted to share any stories or wanted to make any comments. I know there's some wonderful minds out there and
Mhm.
love to
Yeah.
have anybody share.
Please share your resources before you leave, your contact and all the stuff you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. I will put that in the chat. And yes, you know, some of my stuff is in progress, meaning stuff that I'm working on in the next little while. I'm excited that hopefully I'm going to be starting to host some LGBTQ specific retreats and some trans specific retreats. So I'll let you folks know. You know, you can contact me. The last one here is my website. So kaleidosphere.ca is where you can come and you can like contact me. The other ones are Sacred Circle. I've talked about, these are just examples of folks that I've worked with. So Sacred Circle is an Indigenous collective that is doing some amazing things in their community and using plant medicine to you know, bring back cultural healing and to connect back with the earth. Gathering groups is the group model that I have been guest facilitating with, and gathering groups is who I'm working with to eventually in the near future be doing a specific LGBTQ2S plus group medicine sit. So we're working under the harm reduction model. I've talked a little bit about that before. And School of Reverence is who I guest lecture for, and they are the integration collective. And like I said, we work a lot for folks that are queer and trans, neurodivergent, chronically ill, you know, chronic pain, and it's all like a lot of it's sliding scale, a lot of it's community connection. You know, for me, I believe that healing comes in community. Plant medicine's amazing, but community, healthy, connected community is where I feel like I've seen the most healing and I've experienced the most healings in my own journey over the years. So, um, yeah, that's my resources. And that's, I guess, my TED talk, not my TED talk, but my talk today. So,
Your Tabitha talk.
my Tabitha talk. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so one thought I had this past week was I finally finished Killing Eve. And for like lesbians and probably straight women that want to be lesbians, like Killing Eve was like this new direction as far as like seeing cinema and art as being reflective of like what our culture is prepared to take on. And I think a lot of us historically, like if you look at culture and history, there's been romantic love between men, romantic love between people that were non-binary, romantic love between women, but it's only like within the impact of cinema as an art form and the impact of television as an art form and mainstream books and that kind of thing that I feel like until our stars, I feel like there needs to be like a political movement that says, hey, Tom Cruise, like if he is, or Will Smith, or like whoever, like if we could see these people come out of the closet and support them and like they're going to lose revenue for coming out of the closet because our world sells people this happy dream in the United States, right? That says you can be anyone you want to be, little Johnny, right? You can just, if you love boys, that's fine, but it's a lie, right? Because you can't, right? So I feel like there should be a political effort to say we will financially support any star that's willing to come out of the closet if you just give us like your base of what you made, for the last 10 years, because why are they like unwilling to lose, these contracts and these movie deals and all this shit? It's because no one's willing to say, I'll cover your losses, right? But if it's all financial, like, and if we say we have a movement to support these stars to like come out and so forth. So back to Killing Eve, I just want to go on a fucking blog about how disappointing that was because the ending, and I don't mean to give it away to folks, but the ending of Killing Eve for me reminded me of Stella and Louise, right? It's this same concept of any women having like the complexity of women's relationships, or it could be men's relationships. It's anything out of the norm, right? The complexity and the nuance of those relationships and shining a light on those. I feel like the culture has to like kill it or squash it or say it was a nice little dream, boys and girls, but we're gonna like put that to bed now and go back to our straight fantasy, right? That everyone's straight and everyone's binary or whatever. And so for me, I was just like, I just think that if you saw Killing Eve as like, wow, this is the first time you're seeing a straight woman in mainstream, like an Asian straight woman have like veering off the straight path, right? And leaving her husband and being obsessed with this white crazy woman who literally is like sexy and murderous and all this other stuff. But I just feel like if you look at these different parts as kind of like carnal aspects of ourself, like not the divine feminine, but just like the carnal aspects of anyone, I feel like the culture is coming along and squashing that and saying, none of that now, like go to bed, be good little girls, boys and girls that are. So I just feel like we need to do something radical in cinema and movies because we're all such slaves to like Netflix to try to like fight the power.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that relates to what you were saying, but I just feel like I wanted to share it. So.
No, no, I appreciate that. I think it relates in the way that it's, even I find it interesting when you see, something that I think it's changing a little bit, but a lot of these mainstream programs, it's like, oh, it can be gay, but not that gay, or it can be trans, but not that trans. And again, I'm a white person, but I've heard folks of color be like, it's okay to represent if you're a light-skinned person of color, but if you're a dark-skinned person of color, like that's not palatable, right? And so it's like, yeah, I think we definitely need a like fuck it revolution and just blow the lid off of all of it. And it's really interesting because I think that's another endeavor I'm kind of working on the side is trying to do to reach some people in power, and I don't mean like high up political power, but some of the change makers, right? Because this is where if we can reach the change makers and get them to invest not just financially but spiritually in some of these movements, then we can expedite the change in some ways. Not that change ever really moves that fast, but we can help put people in the driver's seat that need to be there. So queer people, trans people, indigenous people, people of color, that are normally pushed to the fringes because of accessibility. So that's something I'd love to see grow over time. The maps, yes. Toby. Toby is our next moderator. Are they in the room? Yes, it's the Jedi Council. So for some reason, the Maps Canada, where it's not updated with the Jedi Council stuff, but you can just type in Maps Canada, and we have a meeting next week, and that's something I'm going to bring up because I was on there today, and I was like, why is the Jedi Council stuff not up there? But it's not, but it will be. So yeah, I have 3 minutes. That's a lot. Is Toby in the room? Do we get Toby in the room? Do we get other people back? Like I said, I sent a message to Joshua, and just like I just forwarded the email that you gave me, so that worked for me to get in, but I don't know if it is working for others. Um, well,
Here.
thank you. Oh,
Hello?
hello.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are you our next speaker?
Yes.
Well, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, AJ.
No, thank you folks for having me. It's been awesome. Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Thank you,
welcome,
AJ.
welcome, Toby. Toby, it's yours. Take it away. It's your hour.
Okay, let me make sure I can. All right. People can see me, they can hear me.
Yeah, yeah.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Well, I guess I'll start with thank you for inviting me to the space. I appreciate my friend that sent me the link to ask me to do this. And then I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then we can go from there, I guess. My name is Toby Joseph. I'm from Colorado. I am Tabaguachi Ute and Hickory Apache mostly. Several other tribes, some Spanish, some Mexican, some French, and can track my family back to 1502 here in the States. That most of what is recorded history that goes further than that is where then the French and the Spanish, some of those kind of filter in. Part of why I guess that's important is it goes back to identity. That growing up where I live in Tacoma, Washington, I've been told that and taught that introductions are an important part of how we connect with each other through social, cultural venues here. That if any of you are familiar with the local canoe journey, it's been going on since about 1989. Tribes from the local area will migrate over a couple-week period to a landing site and then take 6 days to introduce each other, to sing songs and to celebrate and to share through that social connection identity and what it means to be, well, whether that's Puyallup, which is the local tribe that I live near, or Nisqually, or Muckleshoot, or Duwamish, Quinault, or Lummi, or Suquamish, or any of what are 31 different tribes here in the Northwest, who they are. I've got grandchildren at this point. Let's see. So I've got 11 core kids from 2 marriages. There are roughly 32 foster kids on top of that. And so out of that, I've got 21 grandkids and 1 great grandkid. And so for the most part, that's me. Grandfather, father, spent last 35 years of my life pretty much figuring out how to be the best of those words that I can figure out how to be. And then always, I guess, important to, especially in these settings, identify that I'm two-spirited. But I want to express kind of what that means for me. Growing up two-spirited did not have any connection to what it means to be LGBTQ, that it was a conversation about gender, and then not so much from an LGBTQ perspective. There wasn't they and them when I was growing up. That at 56, I can remember being very young, 5 or 6 at least, and my grandma talking to me about what it meant to be two-spirited, that we all had the feminine and the masculine within us. And then her words, not necessarily mine, but ones that I'm just as happy to own. She would say, if you grow up, I don't care if you're on the pole or on the hole. What kind of person are you? Who are you? What's your purpose? Things that later were for me foundational as a storyteller to understand what archetypes meant when they started to identify what they believed in, the shared agreements that any one particular group would decide either meant they were the good guy or the villain. And then people's perspectives that kind of, I guess, led me to the work that I do with a nonprofit called Consultants for Indian Progress. That using the framework of culture, we have three basic goals. First is social connection. And for these purposes, I'm going to say that could mean anything, literally anything that brings people together. And so, whether it's this as a social connection, or canoe journey that I mentioned before, or sweat lodge, or first foods, or ideas of food sustainability, food sovereignty, this way of coming together where people start to share what are shared agreements. That leads me to then CIP, or Consultant for Indian Progress's second step or goal, access to quality resources. That growing up, dandelions were a huge part of food sustainability conversations. Grateful for understanding dandelion as a food, as a tea, as a medicine, as a framework of resilience. And then as I got older, yay, dandelion became this bigger conversation of food sustainability and food is medicine, concepts that culture is medicine, that I think tie into why then we're here today. And for me, what are the third goal of CIP? People understanding what access to quality resources means is important. And then reframing that is the third goal of ours, what mental health looks like, I think is really then foundational for me, all three of them, but specifically that third goal, to go, what is mental health? And then why, as a plant medicine, looking at whether it's hallucinogens or any other plant medicine, things we put in our body to find balance, to find a framework to go, this is the shared agreement, whether that is a shared agreement with a plant and how you form relationships with plants or other people, that always remind me of my grandma's words. I don't care if it's a pole or a hole. You know, what's that relationship? Are those people strength based? Are they value based? Or in plant medicine, is that how you're coming to meet this plant in a way that this time of year, always, it's sad to look at my yard because I've got about 50 different plants growing here. And most of them are connected in some way to plants as food or as a framework of medicine. That I've got tobacco plants in the yard, that we've got roses for the rose hips, that I've got a couple of bins that, yay, they're in their third year of us nurturing in that raised garden dandelion, but specifically for the development of root. That we use a lot of the dandelion root in our medicines. That I've got yarrow and marshmallow, and being able to talk about yarrow as a warrior's plant that really helps to slow bleeding, or can be used for women during moon time to help with regulatory flow. So many of the things like calendula, or well, just plants that for me go back to then this conversation of relationship. How are you meeting those plants? That some of what for me I can share from an indigenous perspective generally, that there are things that I would go, yay, for elders to go, these aren't things we share, not because we're hoarding, but not everything that should be shared. That I'm very selective about how I share to grow certain plants, that whether it's the tobacco that we have in our yard because it gets used for ceremony, and I'm very particular about how we grow it, the relationship that we have with it, how it's nurtured. But then when I think about other plants, to include like the dandelion, that there are places I could go harvest thumb-sized dandelion roots, but they're so close to the freeway, and years of car pollutant and toxins being absorbed into the soil and then into the plant, it's really hard to meet that plant in a healthy way. But I think hallucinogenics, then being very specific to this conversation, are very much the same way. Who grew them and what was the intention that was shared, whether that word is strain or type or language is funny like that. And so for me, I'm less worried about the language than what are the action steps that are going to be taken. And so with our tobacco, because I know how it's used in Sweat Lodge, and I like to be, because it helps me have a sense of social connection, one of a number of partners in community that offer finished tobacco as a product that absolutely is an act of decolonization to our Sweat Lodge to go, here's tobacco that we know this was grown and who it was grown by and in what way it was grown, so that there's intention there that allow then for a community to have access to a quality resource that is this tobacco for Sweat Lodge. It's the same thing that I think about whether it's peyote buttons or anything else that's grown. How is it grown? Is it grown in a good way? And so I think there's a big piece to what is, for me, this conversation, that are a lot of different ways to have the conversation. But I think for importance of interaction here in a moment, and what are the shared agreements that people come to? See. Trying to read some of these comments here just to make sure that I'm answering things that are relevant to what you want to hear. And then some of it things that I go, well, if I have to, in a shared agreement, spend time with you, you're going to spend an hour with me. And so I'm going to talk probably for the first 20 minutes, and then hopefully we'll be able to have some conversation that expands beyond what I'm sharing. That when I see terms like all my relations, there is absolutely a theme. And I say this from a place that I spent 10 years working with a company doing video production that is one of my side hustles. I got to travel the country recording tribal elders. And yay, there's a sense of the word cousin, aunt, uncle. That always, when the planes fly over the top of my house like this, I'm reminded of what interrupted those familial connections. And then when people talk about things like decolonizing, really trying to figure out what does that mean? Because there are some things that I think are not necessarily a colonial framework, but a human framework. And how as humans can we come together that, because I know the time we have, and as a storyteller, always stories that can span time, and then want to be thoughtful and humble of time to go, if I waste your time, you're not going to get it back. So whether there was one person on this link, 10 people, or 1,000 people, the same amount of time is going to pass. And I don't want to waste your time. That I hope by the time we get towards the end of this hour, I will have shared some things that are frameworks for why I think it was important to speak. I appreciate your time. And then I'll navigate these next few minutes through story, because I think they tie back to why, for me, Consultants for Indian Progress was formed in 1976 as a venue for really trying to navigate shared agreements from a tribal perspective that didn't pan-Indianize who we are as a people. And so my friend Norm Nolt brought this group of diverse tribal people together to go, how do we speak for a target population that are our relatives without then trying to act like we're speaking on a government level for treaty responsibilities that are really about tribal sovereignty. And so I don't want to give the impression that I'm speaking as a representative and a spokesman of any one tribe, but as a tribal person, this narrative that goes back to, well, social connection and who are we within frameworks of the shared agreement. And so there's a few stories, and I'm going to kind of blend them into some things that for me started with a creation story back to my grandma. That there was this time that really not much existed, and what did exist, creator thought that wasn't enough and decided to create people. That in this short time, hopefully I can give you some key pieces that I remember first hearing this story and then hearing it other times, having microdosed at events that expanded what this story meant to me. And so after 30 years, in this story, it ends with this rabbit named Squidated. Someone blessed with life is what that word means. That our family has a 36-foot ocean-going canoe that participates in tribal journeys. I have a grandson who also has that name. And then in moments like this, I remind people that word, in the way that words mean things, it means someone blessed with life, that is all of us. And so in this framework of a creation story, I think all of us have to have some way of viewing who we are, that many times I think psychedelics can help to expand what are those deeper questions that a part of our mind may not, for a lot of different reasons, want to venture into that realm and ask those types of questions. That in those expanded spaces, it allows for me even to then offer up in these spaces. The story for me always starts that a long time ago, the animals could speak and people could listen. That I think many times hallucinogenics help us to listen to a part of our brain. That is why I like the way, for me, these stories should open. An invitation into a space that is rarely now found. That can you imagine human beings that listen to one another? They say that that's why the animals stop speaking, and that in a longer version of the creation story, it talks about humans being let out before we were ready. That there were teachings that were denied because Coyote let us out of that bag prematurely. And so as I jump around in this story, and hopefully like those ancestors of old that could listen, you're tracking with me, because what I really want to point out is Dog was there. And Dog feels guilty because they believe that they let Coyote help trick them into letting humans out unprepared. And so many, many years later, there's this meeting where this young rabbit, Squidated, is invited to come and speak because his father, who is too old and feeble to make that journey, they no longer can make that journey. And so in this space, young Squidated is asked to go on that journey as a spokesperson. When he arrives, the animals are meeting because they want to consult on what do we do about the human beings who no longer listen in a good way, that they no longer follow the original instructions that have been put out by Creator. And so as an example, deer complained that when they gave their body up for humans to eat, like salmon, so often some of the best parts were wasted, that people no longer decided to honor those original instructions that were these shared agreements that there were about relationship with each other. And so in this part of the story, Dog hears that the other animals want to do away with human beings. And Dog is concerned because, well, Dog was there in the beginning and understands our potential, understands what it is that is how this journey helps us move forward and find our own purpose as we move on our personal journeys, both individually, as we navigate that with internal battles, external battles, big and little battles that aren't really about winning or losing, but about finding your place, your purpose, understanding that elders are where we go to get those teachings, and finding elders that can help guide us, whether that's on a journey to microdose or how we navigate every single day, or how we meet plants in relationship. That it's important to meet plants because that was one of the things the plants complained about, that humans no longer even met them in a good way and used them the way that they should, that they had started to abuse many of these medicines. And so even the plants were upset that, well, what was decided by the animals is that we'd do away with the human beings. And I laughed because Dog was there. And a little side note to say, how do we know stories like this are true? That in our community, a lot of these are historical Indian why stories. That in this story, there's a number of things that are explained. And they say proof that we know this story, that it happened, that Dog was there, and Dog escaped, and Dog went back to their longhouse, and all the other dogs they consulted. And as they were having what is potlatch in their form of social connection, they would come into the longhouse and they would pull their tails off and they would hang their tails up on the wall to show that they had come in a good way. And so it was in this way that when Coyote got there and saw that they were eating this feast and wanted to participate, well, they just interrupted rudely. They knocked on the door and dog explained, "Hey, Coyote, cousin, family." You know how sometimes things are really only for the people in the house, not for the whole community. And in this case, dogs wanted to know, because this was a serious issue, well, what do we do? And so they sent Coyote away, who was frustrated. But what the dogs decided is that they would warn us. They would warn human beings because they knew that our purpose was great. And that if we found our purpose, that this thing would happen that would transform the entirety of how, whether it was the plants or animals, two-leggeds or four-leggeds, could interact with each other. And so they say that we know that that meeting happened because, well, the dogs, they warned us, and well, proof is we're still here. One of those proofs is that dogs, they're loyal to us in a way that if you have a dog, you know, kind of know what I'm talking about. That they do this thing that is still to this day stay loyal to us. That they don't hang in the woods unless it's in a pack because the other animals are mad at them and they'll be hunted down, whether by wolves or coyotes or other animals. That some of these proofs, if they're not enough for you, it said that, you know, another proof that this meeting happened with the dogs is that when Coyote was dismissed and told to go away, that, you know, that there was no hard feelings, just you couldn't be there for this particular meeting. What he decided to do was then to go up to the longhouse window, and while everyone was in deep consultation, and I always recommended, don't be this kind of person, but Coyote being Coyote, they climbed under that window, and as loud as they could, they hollered the word fire. And all of the dogs, they got up and they panicked, because as anybody would when hearing the word fire, they would panic. And they say that because dogs, as part of that protocol, remember I told you they would take and put their tails up on the wall like that to show they'd come in a good way. The dogs, they jumped up and they grabbed whatever tail was closest to them. And they say part of how we know this story is true is it's why they still sniff each other's butts. That I have a friend that tells stories, and he says at this point, that is all. But there's a little bit more I want to share with you because I think it gives context. That it's not just about these dogs warning us or the animals deciding they wanted to do away. That explains why they don't talk to us like that anymore. But really understanding that, like the word squidetad, we're all someone blessed with life. That so often, and for me, the conversation then shifts because part of one of my other side hustles is I'm an intervention prevention specialist. I'm a target population coordinator for shared messaging with the local Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. And so I've spent probably 20 years looking at what are those things that are the assessment values in our communities that are the disparities that so often are mental health issues, the abuse of whether drugs or food or tobacco, or so many of the sacred medicines that, as a native, I was told were shared with us as a part of a shared agreement in how we can live together. They bring me to these places in the stories to go, there's a story about a honey badger that as he's growing, his family teaches him things and shares medicine songs with him, that he's told that here's how you live in a good way, that when you meet and you go out to harvest medicines, you should always have a song. And so his family gave him this song that goes like this. That it said that song, that Badger was singing it one day by the river and praying to Creator, can you help me find a way that I could be smart and people will look at me kind of like they do Coyote. And well, Coyote was there that day and heard this thing that then, where the story goes is him sharing with Honey Badger this way that Honey Badger can then become smarter. And what's interesting, if you look Honey Badgers up online, and I encourage you, please do, you'll find they're incredibly smart animals. And then this story is another way to look at how these things, and we as humans, and especially for me as an indigenous perspective, through storytelling, we come to understand how, why. These things that help us go, oh, there's another way that potentially we can move forward, that I was told is an elder's job, and as a storyteller, this responsibility to go, let's tell the story. And traditionally, I was told that I shouldn't explain the story. very minimally should I guide people to a place to go, this is what this is about. And then a dear elder that reminded me, that was how traditionally it once was. And the way that we now are is emergent because we're in a time of war, that war has caused trauma. And in a time of war, you do things that you might not do in a time of peace. And sometimes protocols that you would have had, they change. And so as much as it is, yay, we're going to be moving into winter and in a time traditionally of storytelling, important now to share these stories throughout the whole year because, well, people, they need these stories. And so in part for me, it's kind of where I'll go from here. This little badger was told that to be smarter, they would have to go on this long journey. They would go through this desert. They would go through these rivers. They would go over these mountains. And they would then find this valley that, well, were described as smart berries. They would need to be harvested at midnight. The honey badger would need to sing this song, that song that I shared with you, and then harvest them, put them in this medicine bag, retrieve them, and bring them home. And then would the people eat them in front of them and share them in a way that, well, in this way, Coyote said to Badger, honey badger, you do this and you will become smarter. You will become, people will understand that you are brave and courageous, and, well, you'll go further down this path that you're looking to travel down. And so, being trusting and a little on the gullible side, honey badger decides to go on this journey, and along the way from the people in the river learns to fish, and as they're in the mountains they learn to prepare meat and jerky because they need these things to travel in this way. And by the time they reach this valley, they've understood and learned things from people who've shared, from being just part of what it means to be part of a fellowship. And so it's in this way that, well, honey badger harvests these berries and makes the journey back, and makes the journey back quicker because they now know things that they had to learn along the way, that yay for these people that, again, were elders and part of a fellowship that help them understand how to make a net, how to harvest salmon, how to sit quietly in the mountains, and understand how to harvest deer and elk and rabbit and other things that were proteins that were needed for this long journey. And so as they got home, they arrived there, and as midnight approached, they, as instructed, they pulled the whole village together. And in this way, they started to open up that medicine bag and swallow what inside were, well, described as the smart berries that would transform who they were. And so in this way, as they got about halfway through the bag, because they greedily opened that bag and started to swallow, and then immediately started to turn colors and spit the berries out and turn to Coyote, and in query wanted to know why they would do this thing that now honey badger understood these were not smart berries. These were rabbit droppings. And in this way, Coyote described, long story short, well, you'll never do that again, will you? And aren't you the smarter for it? That he explained that only lived experience, only these things that come from social connection and having elders and navigating a fellowship, only these things that came in that way as shared agreements moved us forward and could, well, elevate us to this place of knowing. And so they say that it's in that way that honey badger continued to move forward through life, traveling with his fellowship, seeking out elders in the best way, and then became this creature that others then look to and know now as, well, if you go online and look at those videos, you too will see honey badgers are probably some of the smartest creatures on the planet. And a part that I would interject, that is all, because the story, like honey badger's journey, could grow into a thing that would take much more time to explain than we have in the short hour that we're together. And as what I would guess I close with as far as storytelling goes, this framework that rabbit that went to that meeting that sang their song, they sang this love song that the words were Awahatsago, Ayonishne, as much as something could be, I love you. And in this way, they showed up late to that meeting, and it was bear and cougar and eagle who ripped them apart, ripped their arms and legs from their body, ripped their head from their body, spread those arms and those legs to the four winds, put their head up top of that sacred mountain, that at the end, rabbit's corpse, as it lay there, silent and alone in the snow. It was the eagle who starts to spread their mighty wings to start this meeting so they could figure out what to do about the humans who no longer listen. Well, it was in this way that they understood that even without arms or legs, that Rabbit's song still had a beat that came from their heart, that their head called back from the sacred mountain was able to finish that song and pulled hold. And what they decided was to do away with us. It goes back to why it was important the dog was there and saw that we all have purpose. And that it's through that purpose that I think is most important to understand how we move forward in this world to find what is our place and our purpose on this journey that starts with our first breath and ends with our last. That I don't think I've shared anything that you didn't already know. That framing in this way, even in the context of looking at what is Indigenous storytelling, I'm not sharing with you what is a tribe's truth, but a truth that through storytelling and growing up in a tribal way, I share with you because it's important to me to go, whether it's through any medicine, psilocybin, microdosing, peyotes, however you navigate that journey, do it in ceremony. Please do it in a good way. Form a relationship with these medicines that start with an introduction. That I would never encourage jumping into a relationship and then falling so in love that in the first day you try to navigate what only time can in a relationship. Because if, like in this time that we've shared, you don't do it in a good way with strong shared agreements, oftentimes you end up like Coyote in other stories that become these stories of how Coyote lost his beautiful coat, his beautiful voice, his beautiful eyes, and so many of the gifts that were his because he didn't engage in things always in a good way, kind of headstrong and wants to do it my way. And so find elders, find people to accompany you, find people to sit with you in space to go, how do we do this in a good way? And I guess kind of where I'll end my part of the story. And then thank you for your time and thank you for listening to the story. That hopefully for you, I shared enough of what are these stories that as you move forward, you do it in a good way, that you're careful of the traps that many times are what it means to be human, are part of the journey that too often create the trauma. And there's just too many opportunities for that trauma to create the traps that don't allow us to move forward. And so back to just do it in a good way and in the best way you can. And when hardship comes up, when things get hard, part of being human is experiencing a range of emotion that, like story and time, this too will pass. So don't give up, because if you do, that takes you down one road that not giving up takes us down another road, and one that I hope that we can all engage in, that is one of consultation, that we all are sharing who we are in an authentic way. And then irregardless of gender, irregardless of presentation of gender or sexuality, irregardless of pole or hole, we're coming in a good way, in a strength-based way, with a good heart. And that is all. So I guess this is the point where I'll go, if there's anybody that has questions or wants to engage in some general conversation. Yeah, we got about 30 minutes left. And so, yeah, here we are.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, some folks are having a hard time getting back into the meeting. For some reason, the Zoom is not working for them. So if there's anyone out there in the audience who wants to be helpful, I'll stick some of the emails in the message, but I just wanted to see if we could try to send a personal invite to include folks, because I don't know why they're not being allowed in. That's certainly unfortunate. But I had a question for you, Toby, while we sort that out. And the question was, I have a lot of anger having worked in social justice for the Department of Children's Services and worked in family treatment court. And I've worked at Daybreak Star, and I've worked at Seattle Indian Health Board. And I feel like I'm like a bad person because I've literally like shoved like Suboxone and methadone and 12-step at all of these different communities. Like even if you got dinged for cannabis in family treatment court, you could potentially not see your kid. And literally, I would be able to go off on the weekend. If I want to engage in cannabis, I can legally. If I want to go to a legal ayahuasca church, I can. And I felt like as a social worker and as a therapist, like and a substance use professional, that I was just a giant fraud in a lot of ways. But I also found that working with Native communities, I developed a lot of anger. I feel like I have a lot of anger issues related to the fact that knowing how wealthy some of these tribes are, right? And knowing that they have such a high rate of recidivism. I would handle the intake for child welfare for CPS calls at central intake, and we would get so many calls from the tribes like Yakima, Muckleshoot, whatever, and really horrible situations. But a lot of times it was drugs, right? And I'm talking about real drugs, like hard drugs. And what bothers me is I feel like, man, you guys have so much fucking money, like not every tribe, but like you guys have so much money, or you get grants or whatever, but you keep sending your people back to these like horrible institutions that are like 12-step only, like all these wealthy, basically mostly white people that I know that have money, they're able to go off to Peru or fly their like Peruvian shaman up or something. And I'm like, I'm sorry, like, why is it that this person over here that's like got money, got connections, has some education, that they're having access to this, but the tribes can't like work with a shaman or work with an international healer that does ibogaine or something? Because it's like, I feel like you talked about a war. Well, I feel like there's a war on Native people, right? If you look at addiction. So I don't understand, like, I know that there's reasons for it, but like on some level, is there like, I just feel like do they not read the news? Like, are they not like, what needs to happen for, and I know it needs to be like native based and indigenous based, but like to have someone in the tribe be like, why are we putting our people into these treatment centers that make money off of recidivism? Like that's how these drug companies make their money, these drug rehab. So anyway, that's it. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, not a problem. So probably part of why my friend asked me to engage in this vertical, for whatever reason, these kinds of questions are pretty common. And I think genuinely and authentically being asked for good reasons, and then many times from a absolutely gross misperception of some verticals of information. And so I'll start with the perception of tribal wealth, because of the way that that conversation and the propaganda around that conversation, that in itself is a war on indigenous people, is modeled in the news. So it gives this perception, and then this statement of, wow, these Indians got a lot of wealth. So let me drop a couple things. 5% of the tribes across the country have casinos. Of that 5%, less than 50% of them are ran by the tribe, because they have yet to be in a place where they have the human resources to navigate that. And so a lot of that tribal wealth, like uranium or oil or any other resource, is being still oppressively mined as a resource from these tribal communities. So, as an example, the amount of wealth that goes to one of the local tribes here that is grossly over exaggerated in community, that comes out as this statement of, man, the Indians got a lot of wealth. Each Indian in that tribe alone, that they represent about 4,000 natives in an area that has about 40,000 natives. So, as only a small percentage, they get $1,600 a month. I personally can make more than that working a part time minimum wage job. So, that is not a level of wealth that in itself sustains a community to be able to do the things that are what many rich, entitled communities have access to. And you'll notice I didn't say white communities, because I think that is a gross opportunity for racism that is, to me, one of the vital oligarchical tools and corporate tools used to separate people, because many income white people suffer from the same issue, that it's an access to quality resources issue. And I don't know any poor white folks going off to Peru either, or having access to sweat lodge, that within tribal communities, there is a small movement that has elevated to a national level, that even SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Agency, which is the government's, if you want to call it the arm of their mental health and wellness, they have finally deemed culture, and then in part why things like peyote ceremony are important. But I don't think so important that they're to be seen as the only tool, because I think, like going off to Peru, these things are about individuals going off to safe space, to connect with elders in a fellowship, to have some framework of shared agreement that then sets off, that I think sometimes some of these microdose sessions can do for people, a framework of thought that, if you study neurolinguistic programming, it really lends that thoughts become things. That is a tribal tradition that I think has been handed down in many ways, that in this time of war need to be shared outside of our own communities, because we're in a time where so many are perpetuating the things that come out of war as racism and trauma develop intergenerational hurts. And then all of a sudden, collectively, whatever framework of the medicine wheel, whether red, white, black, or yellow, you have people that are hurt, and hurt people hurt people. That as a tool, I think a good framework would be to go to, as an example, there's a site, White Bison. They really focus on intergenerational trauma and talk about, well, what I think is then the root of some of how I'll answer your question. What can happen is people understand that whether it was the Dark Ages or the Roman Empire or the Inquisition that was after indigenous knowledge through the frameworks of matriarchal leadership, this war on humanity, that much like the genocide on Native Americans, has been a war on our culture and humanity for control by an elite group that is less than 2% of the planet. That, I don't want to get into conspiracy stuff, but hey, here we are. So let's talk about Illuminati and Bilderberger groups and, Office of Foreign Affairs and all of these frameworks that are perpetuating systems that are why it's important to come back to what are original instructions. Simple conversations that are, what does it mean to have shared agreements in connection, in social connection, that are strength-based, that are kind, loving, radiant, truthful, just value systems that can be used from a wraparound approach of care, from an intervention and prevention strategy, to go, here's why, like, and I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell, we get people to connect that they're all the warrior, that they're all the hero. And coming back from war, there are ceremonies and stories that go, oh, here's why warriors were pulled out and segregated from community for weeks to months on time, to go, how do you heal so you don't bring that trauma of war back to the community in many of the ways that I feel like we now see regularly. And so White Bison, I think, does a good job of going through a framework of the healing forest, recognize what you have to offer, and be that tree that provides space as a mother or a father of tradition for what are the developing sons and daughters of tradition. And so a big call to go navigating what would be people who, and why gay for people are going all the way to Peru and can afford that, going to the source of where these teachings are and not being suckered in by charlatan shamans who for $10 in 1995 will give you a pathway to healing. And healing isn't an overnight framework, that, like the story of honey badger, is this lifelong journey of lived experience that we learn from, that we develop from. And then to address the tribal wealth, for the tribes that have developed a level of wealth, and one of the local tribes that I won't name for a number of reasons, I'm always impressed that as one of the tribes at the forefront of that wealth, so much of that wealth means they're the number one employer in Pierce County. That when you look at the number of dollars contributed to nonprofit efforts, they also are the number one contributor in Pierce County. That non-tribal people and tribal benefits are seeking employment with this tribe because of how generous they are with their employees who 75% of them are not tribal. And so as they're supporting this broader community growth, we have a community that our local native center feeds 500 to 600 people a month because there are not enough resources to take care, like in dominant driven culture systems, the frameworks of social services that are, well, one of the reasons nonprofits like mine exist, to continue to support social connection, to continue to support access to quality resources, to continue to destigmatize mental health, whether those frameworks of social connection are through hallucinogenics and microdosing, or through powwow, or through the singing of songs, or the telling of stories, or carving, or any other cultural pathway that is a healing framework and strength-based pathway for people that are on their own journeys. That if you're following what I said and how I said it, I applaud you, because that means you have something in you that is this level of elder, that you have a role to play in the fellowship, as well as finding a fellowship for yourself. That if you didn't understand what I said, find an elder, ask more questions, and then find the call that becomes your purpose to wake up every day, that then isn't about the tribe's wealth or anybody else's wealth, but how do we redistribute wealth amongst the people so the suffering is minimized, especially given that we're in a time of war and there's so much suffering. That I hope that answers your question, because I feel like it was a little bit roundabout, because to just assume that the tribe has a level of wealth and, gee, I don't get why they're not doing more, it almost lends to an entitled perspective that there's enough wealth, and because then there's enough wealth, we should have a sustainable system. That we do not have the levels of wealth that would create sustainability of the colonial government framework that we're now all living under. I hope that answers it and gives rise to more questions.
Well, I mean, I hear you on the entitlement piece, but I'm just wondering, is there anything that we can do as a non-native person to support the movement of tribes to look at different alternative methods like we're talking about here, like the plant medicines?
Absolutely.
And then if so, how can we do that in respectful ways?
So a few things I'll share with you. As an executive director of a nonprofit, what I always tell people when I feel like I'm asked this general question, read the book American Holocaust by David Stannard, because as a starting place, that's going to give you information and show that you've been willing to put in a level of work. That I'll quote the last white woman that I told to read that book. Why did you tell me to read that book? I'll never be the same. Because you need to understand what our people went through and why we'll never be the same. And then what I would say is, after you read that, don't ever look to form a relationship with the tribe, because it is an invisible entity, like the word government, that doesn't really exist. Find relationships with individual tribal members, and then don't support them as an ally, because that's a place that, much like a Karen, allows for people when uncomfortable to step away. Support like an accomplice. Like you have that individual because you formed a relationship and have shared agreements to go, I got your back, and I got your back to the point when the sirens are coming. I'm like, hey, homie, we got to get out of here. As opposed to, there they are. I was just waiting for you to show up, officer, so that I can tell you that, well, they were playing music in the park, or whatever the metaphor leads to, whether that's a knee on the back of the neck or any of what are a number of narratives I could express that have been the negative outcomes, unless people who have been long-term allies start to up their game and do their work, and then form relationships with shared agreements that go, here's healthy boundaries. Let's explore what those are, and then do it as a human being, not as a white person. Do your work to be a good person, to form relationships that are authentically and transparently invested in a way that people go, oh, this is what a familiar relationship can feel like, where there's conflict, where there's grief, and a framework of healing that, like when I mentioned the veterans who took time before they entered or re-entered the village after war, that they made sure that their spirit was right again. there's a lot of other stories and frameworks of story that I could share, but they really talk about the individual working on themselves, that I think that's what people can do. Because once you get enough skills, you can then start to share those skills. That one of the things I've always owned as a parent, and especially having now parented a number of kids, I got to meet them where they are. As much as I would, and at times I have some kids, I'm going, okay, here's this skill, here's this food, here's this water that I'm trying to lead you to, that you can lead a horse to water. And as they say, you can't make them drink. But what you can do is be this accomplice who accompanies to a level where you're constantly salting their oats. That as a good human being, you're in a good way, consciously always being there, doing the best you can to salt their oats. Because eventually people get thirsty enough, they'll drink from the river themselves. And then hopefully the water or the liquid that you've led them to in this metaphor isn't some Kool-Aid, because in that metaphor, we have too many people trying to lead other people to drink the Kool-Aid. So I hope that makes sense, because there's a lot that I said there that if you don't get metaphor, you might not pick up on. But to answer your question directly, the best thing you could do is to work on yourself, not be a racist, understand what white entitlement is, and then as a human being who's done that, work with other human beings on social justice causes, because you're both human beings, not because you're being pitiful or pitying the other group, that you're sharing from an authentic platform that is a place of equality, because I think that's the place that allows for diversity to thrive. And when people can create unity and diversity, that's when I've seen social justice move forward and people start to hear each other. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a deep question, but I do get that there's some steps that people can take and some attitudes to adopt and into going into the question. But also, I just wanted to mention that there was a question in the chat about the books that you would recommend. So for people that are looking for book recommendations, and I know you just mentioned one, but just other than the Holocaust book.
Yeah, so do want to re-emphasize David Stannard's book, The American Holocaust. I think it is an absolutely must read. And then if I were going to like reference just a few other titles that I think are incredibly helpful, there's a book called Braiding Sweetgrass that I think is a beautiful overview of Native perspectives that has been adopted and is a way of sharing some of these principles that I think we're all talking about. And so after that, probably the next one, there's a youth version of Braiding Sweetgrass that I think is really relevant, that it doesn't dumb down, but shares with youth that I think in many cases are the same youthful place, people inquiring how to move forward in journey space come from, that a lot of times that we don't get in puberty, the elders to guide us to a place for transition, that words like then humility and balance and wisdom start to come into play. And so I think then after that, one of my favorite books, there's a book called Black Elk Speaks that I think gives a really good framework of human understanding and traditional frameworks of thinking that people can then walk away and go, oh, these are values of the Lakota people that are why what Black Elk spoke on were important. And so Black Elk Speaks, I think, an incredibly valuable title to absorb. If I think people are into, because earlier I heard a little bit of conversation about like the industry that has become Hollywood, but really looking through the lens of what's this video called Real Indians, REEL, like Hollywood version of what an Indian should be, because it raises the question, what is a real Indian? And so often what we all have are these stereotypical perceptions of who are a tribal people across the United States alone that represent over 560 different tribes. That's just as true in Canada. And when you look at then the literally hundreds and hundreds of tribes that exist, this dichotomy that to try to blend them all together in itself is a colonial framework that isn't healthy. And so I've really found that storytelling books have been a good framework for looking at different cultural value systems, because like Aesop's fables or the parables of the Bible, they create a framework of shared agreement that all of a sudden go back to storytelling 101 to me, archetypes. And when you understand the archetype of coyote, you start to understand, oh, that's the archetype of trickster, or in other communities, some people might say the devil. But that's not really how, from indigenous viewpoints, coyotes look, or raven, or a number of frameworks that it's not really good or evil in the Christian dichotomy, but a framework of finding balance. And so then all of a sudden, what is the archetype of bear? What is the archetype of eagle? What is the archetype? Because they lend to then these story narratives that I think are what it means to be human. And so I think people that want to do work with tribes or are looking for books, storytelling books give a good framework for what those value systems are. And so, like, literally at this point, you can look up what were the tribal stories of, because I live here in the Northwest, the Coast Salish people. And so you'll find archetypes that are wrapped around a woman named Slapu, ogress, basket woman, in the way that she steals children who don't behave. And then a way that is this cautionary tale to kids, hey, you better behave, or Slapu, she'd come and get you. And then all of these frameworks of behavior that guide kids to go, oh, here's how you should be. Stories that talk about this little girl and how she works within the framework of story to help the people lift the sky off the backs of the community, that just as well could be a metaphor for looking at oppression and how do we work together to lift that as a group. That the word Yahout then becomes important, because it becomes in community a way of recognizing when we hear the word Yahout, that means we all got to work together. And so very often what I think have become, as I learned about neurolinguistic programming, the very foundation for then sharing with our youth stories and frameworks of story that so often people don't get. That I've been a part of microdosing communities in the past where, they had elders that just told stories as people sat around and listened, and then tried to figure out what that story meant for them to learn and move forward. That I would say that same thing with books, but look for books that have been vetted, that names like Vi Hilbert, Bruce Miller, Johnny Moses, Elaine Grinnell, they become frameworks to go, these people who are vetted elders in tribal community have written books that then articulate those stories. And whether, again, that's bear or elk or even mouse or peesh or peeps peesh. And even knowing within language, peesh is a cat. And all of these behaviors that are what happen that you don't hear surrounded around peeps peesh, which is the word for kitten. And a whole model of behaviors through story that you hear happen with peesh that didn't happen with peeps as they transition from childhood to adult. That I think microdosing can give at times a framework, in the same way that books allow for people to tap into this other alpha place of the brain to start to deeply question their purpose, their who, their why. And so it's not so much a specific author. And then looking at, like, as an example, and I wish I could remember the author, there's a book called Two Old Women. That would be another book I would highly recommend, because it gives a framework of thought to the importance of elders and why it's important to have elders in your life, no matter what the call is, to find an elder who has a specialty and a lived experience wisdom, that they become then the teacher with your fellowship to help you answer whatever that call is, whether it's sobriety or academics or literally any call that you can imagine. It becomes you being the one, or the elder, or the warrior, or the hero in your own journey. And so I hope that helps a little with what you're asking, because there's a lot of great literature out there. but there are books just because they're written by natives. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend, and I don't want to be in a place to let me backbite on any particular author. But there are authors who are indigenous who were trained in an academic framework that the word apple would apply to, that they're now sharing perspectives that are very much mainstream collegiate frameworks of thought, and why I recommend looking for books written by elders from tribal communities that are storytelling frameworks that were captured in a lot of really incredible books in like the early 1900s that now provide a snapshot into what people like Black Elk were telling as stories and frameworks of thought from indigenous people. That, I guess, the last author I would say, anything that you could listen to or find to read by a guy named John Trudell. That, as a matter of fact, if there's any one singular name that I said, hey, you want to know how to be a modern day ally or accomplice or friend of the Native community, understand what John Trudell had to say, that as an artist, as a poet, as a musician, as a spoken word master, what he shared was this way of being that was both indigenous and human at the same time. So that'd probably be the last author I would put forward to answer your question.
Awesome, thank you. We have a couple more minutes if anyone had any questions.
I was just curious to find out, um, with regards to frameworks for substance use and alcohol use, in addition to the medicine support, what other supportive factors would you say would be necessary and needed to support someone's overall healing journey?
So there's a lot of different ways I immediately want to answer that question. And to be honest with you, my ADHD, there's like 10,000 things. They boil it down to 100, boil it down to a few that I can articulate. So for me, the medicine wheel has always been a foundational framework of how to think about self, that I would say look up different perspectives, but specifically, if you go to medicine wheel teachings connected to an author named Phil Lane Jr., he produces some work that articulates different ways of seeing the medicine wheel to start to look at how am I serving my mental, how am I serving my spiritual, how am I serving my physical, you know, how am I serving my emotional. That all of a sudden those four frameworks allow for what I think is this healing journey with self at the center. That anyone going on a journey, if you're not looking at emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual, it's going to be much more difficult to find balance. And then looking at how to create frameworks. That I've also loved the medicine wheel because it's our way of articulating what to me is humanity. Because I think going on this journey, so often we get sucked into what humanity means from a cultural perspective or a religious perspective or some other dogma perspective that says, let me separate me and what is the other. And then I think it's important, because this is, to me, is what medicine wheel does, is go, the other leads back to self. And being able to look at all of our human parts in their entirety, from that mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual, to then go, here's where healthy boundaries are. And when we start to interact, it's the mending of that circle, and then finding our place in the circle, wherever that might be. That sometimes that means playing the elder, sometimes that means going, I recognize I'm the warrior, or sometimes going, that means there are other archetypes that, when you become self-aware, I think start to go, well, why am I getting so drunk and playing the part of the fool? Or why am I doing drugs and playing whatever other archetype that people find, whether that's the drama queen or the joker or the shaman, that you find that role, because even microdosing circles and people that play that role of the shaman, they need to be working on balance or they're going to lead people to being unbalanced. And so the medicine wheel for me has always been a good way of thinking about balance, and then doing it from those four directions has helped me to sustain what for me has been a journey that, oh, when my kids died, I definitely needed those frameworks to survive. When I had 2 back surgeries and had to go, hey, morphine and methadone and this pain concoction became a daily thing, that I've got 15 years free of painkillers. I do not have 15 years free of pain. And then, yay, that this saying aligned with other stories that made me realize pain was obligatory. It's a part of life. Suffering, however, is optional. And on this journey that is wellness and healing, I wish you pain. Pain that teaches you growth, that allows you to move through the things to develop the skills that from lived experience you can then, well, offer what I'm going to now say. The thing that helped me the most was recognizing that I had to deal with my journey first. That so often I put myself in situations to be the savior, the hero in this unhealthy way, that the more we work on self, then the more tools we have to help others. But always self has to be what is central to that, where that healing journey starts. And then for me, that framework of the medicine wheel that offers those four verticals, and then remembering balance, remembering humility, remembering strength-based values to be kind, loving, radiant, truthful, just. That for me, those are the main frameworks, because when I'm not being those things, I'm being this other thing that make me go, oh, there's why I should be aware that even as a two-spirited person, maybe I'm stepping into a role of entitlement, whether male or female, that, well, how do I stay in my own lane? And from a healing perspective, doing that for self is where I had to start. And then yay for White Bison, yay for AA, yay for what are mainstream frameworks. That I guess the last title I would offer, because it was a major part of my healing that isn't necessarily a native book, but one that is about wellness. It's called Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by You? That ultimately, I think so often people that end up in these frameworks that need other frameworks to support growth, it's because they were forced to love and then give up a sense of who they were to get love in return. That this central question is stated in this basic way: conflict is going to come because that's a part of social connection. But when it comes, are we trying to learn? And then I would add, from this open and humble framework of learning that leads to learning, as opposed to this closed environment that always leads to a place of feeling separated, alone. And I think where most people who end up in this framework going, I'm having health with, like, I need help with my mental health issues because this place I'm in isn't sustainable, and I don't want to feel the way I feel. I don't want to feel like this anymore because it hurts. Well, to remind people, hey, you know what? I don't know where you are, but I'm willing to stand here long enough to accompany you on your journey and share with you my lived experience. That if any of it helps, yay, that you become that elder. That I think this book, Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by You, creates a framework of sharing that helps people go, oh, how do we continue to go back to a model that is learning? That conflict is going to come. And even in the healthiest relationships that become familial, well, people go, this is my relative, conflict is going to come. And so understanding that that's a natural pathway, and then folding that into the medicine wheel and going, how do I find balance for self? How do I continue to learn? Those are the spaces that we grow. So again, I hope I haven't wasted your time, and that helps to answer, and then gives you a couple of resources that do I have to give up me to be loved by you was a great framework. And then from a food perspective, the absolute last book I'll share, How Not to Die. That I can't remember the author, but this gentleman in this book looks at, from a first foods perspective, what is it that is the the nutrients that are the medicine, that are, whether we're getting it from nettle or from dandelion or from sweetgrass or from potatoes or anything else. What are those nutritive medicines that are what we need in plants, like rose hips? Until I knew that there was 7 times more vitamin C in rose hips, I was overdoing it with orange juice because I thought that was the only place I could get my vitamin C. When I learned that nettle has 10 times the nutritional value of kale, I went, oh, something that I can turn into a tea that tastes much better, that I can fold into almost anything I'm cooking, that immediately ups the nutritional value. I formed a relationship with my food that then wasn't forming a relationship with the things that are killing us, that are McDonald's and fast food and all of that stuff. And so, yeah, how not to die. I think that really then, because it speaks to what do we put in our bodies. And so whether that's kava, something to calm us, or lavender, or nettle, or psilocybin, what are the things that truly are medicine that in balance serve the mental, the emotional, the physical, and the spiritual as we go on a journey. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. We're having some technical difficulties, and I just want to thank you so much for your time and giving your energy and sharing all your wisdom. Thank you so much. Our next moderator is Tam, and if they can't get on, then I think we are going to have to change the Zoom link because we're already kind of 10 minutes into.
They made it on.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, I think so. Tam, are you there? Unmute yourself.
Okay. So thank you so much, Toby, for speaking, and we hope to work with you in the future in terms of connecting. But yeah, I'm just a little bit concerned that Tam is able to get on for the next moderator for the next hour. We're going to be going 24 hours, so feel free, Toby, to stay on and be part of the discussion. And also, if you can put your contact information in the chat. I don't know if you have access to the chat. So if Tam's not here, I think we're gonna have to recreate. Tam, are you here by any chance?
Their name is Kinzen. Do you see them? I see some phone numbers. Tam, did you call in? 6. I'm getting multiple messages. The unmute isn't working. Okay, what's your phone number? Hello?
Okay, so the unmute is not working for Tam. I just got the same message.
Okay.
So
But what is their number?
it looks like they're connecting to audio. So
okay.
I don't know if that's them, but it says connecting to audio.
It's a 732-470 number. I just asked to unmute.
Okay, I don't know if
this is Jean. I just called in and I'm on. It might have been me that you thought was Tam.
okay. Actually, Tam is right here. 4316. So I don't know why Tam is unable to unmute.
Well, I don't have access to unmute them. Don't we have to unmute them as a co-host or a host? Ask them to unmute for them to unmute.
They were on there for a second and seemed to be unmuted for just a brief second there. Yeah, I'm trying to sort out like what does anyone have any thoughts, because
the host or a co-host has to unmute them.
Right, but they're not on right now that I can see.
Yeah, they are. I see them.
Okay.
This 1732-470-4316 is their phone number, and they're in there. I would say, well, from my view, the gallery view, they're the third row down right beside Lynette. And it's a
Okay.
phone call. They called in.
Okay, got it. So one person's muted, one person is, Indy is muted. You said they're next to Danny.
No, Lynette.
Okay, so that person, in my view, is that's not the same number that we were
That's
discussing.
because you probably have them. Well, do you see the 732 number?
No.
Well, if you add me as a co-host, I can
Never
unmute.
mind, never mind. Hold
Well,
on.
Lynette can do it too.
You actually are a co-host.
Am I? I don't
Yeah.
see. Okay.
So I keep pressing ask to unmute and I'm not
Yeah,
really.
Okay, if we're both doing it at the same time, we might be muting them at the same time we're asking. So you go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
Is it in the security settings? Try going into the security
Yeah,
settings.
the security settings. Yeah.
Security settings. So people should be able to unmute themselves.
Yep.
And so in theory, Tam should be able to unmute themselves. Yeah, so I don't know exactly what's happening there, but it doesn't seem like it's working. So what do you think? Do you think we should just try to create a new Zoom room?
Well, they said that they're on the phone, which I don't understand how they can join the meeting on the phone.
No, a bunch of people have not been able to join the meeting. So
They keep getting a thing saying the host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves.
yeah, but that's
So I can go ahead and like ask to unmute. I'm gonna do that and see if that changes.
Yes, there we go. Yeah, no, I couldn't unmute myself. All right. What's hi guys, sorry, I'm
Hey
a
Rick,
little
how
bit
you
late.
doing?
All right, good to see everybody. All right, what's the issue? Am I able to get into the
There's a person, the next speaker is Tam, and their phone number is 732. They're calling in. However, they keep getting an error that says the host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves. So where are we going wrong here?
let's see.
not only that, but a bunch of people have been getting a response saying that they're getting removed from the meeting.
Oh, crap. Leo, are you able to make me a co-host so I can get into the security and see if I can monkey around with a little bit?
Yeah.
We'll get to the bottom of this. We've weathered tougher storms on these events.
And maybe on their phone, it's just really difficult for them to unmute.
Okay, let's see.
They don't.
Yeah, it's the start video is the one you don't want them to be able to do, because that's how we get spammed and Zoom bombed with porn and other unsightly nonsense.
Okay, so in theory, people can unmute themselves now, and
They should be able to now. They just can't yeah, you just don't want them to be able to start video, because then they can start any freaking video you want. It's usually something
right. But do you have any
horrifying.
idea why people are saying it's
Oh,
okay.
enable waiting room? Why is that checked? Is that, did we try check?
So people,
Oh, no.
people are getting
okay.
removed.
Hold on.
That's also the issue.
Okay, now okay. You have unlocked the meeting. New participants can join. She's putting in the wrong, tell her to try different, go to the Facebook page and try using that link instead to get in. I think it's the link she's trying to use. Because I was able to join now just fine. Yeah, like I just hopped on this meeting, so
right.
They should be able to. I think we're using the wrong link.
Okay.
they might be using the phone one instead of the other one.
No, Rick, just so you know, we've had like 5 or 6 people tell us they've either gotten kicked out, or it says that the person hosting the meeting is not allowing them in.
Okay. Crap. All right.
And also Tam has a request that we don't keep saying their name, I mean their number out loud. So I did want to mention that. So, and then Tam is saying that they just got removed, or they got removed when they tried to join normally. So I'm just wondering if we want to just create a new Zoom meeting, because it just seems like this is like corrupted or something is wrong.
Is that? Oh crap.
Let's do it. I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, that's weird. I wonder. I was able to get in, no problem. That's
No, it
this
seems.
is the first time we run into this one. Crap.
Well, I've actually had people not been able to get before onto meetings before.
What if can you stop the maybe like temporarily stop the stream and then start it again? Or that? Never mind.
I don't know if that would make much difference.
Mm.
We could stop the
Suspend
meeting. We
participant
could stop,
activity.
yeah, we could stop the Zoom meeting for a minute and then try to rejoin and see if it works that way. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I like
Yeah,
okay. Let's Google it, because I mean this is what I did last time. I just looked up the issue and I Googled it and we were able to find it. So
Okay.
Participants can't join Zoom.
This is the issue that you're having. Mark, could you try to help me with this?
Out. Okay. User kicked out of the meeting. Meeting cannot access web. Why do I keep getting kicked out of the Zoom meeting?
Yeah, everyone.
Your device is too far away from the router, or your network is congested. So that makes it sound like it's on her end. The internet she's trying to connect to is not up to snuff. Is what the first Google response. Users kicked out and not able to join again. For the past common issue, some users are not able to join, and this is from last year. The URL for registrants open browsers, but oh man, I don't know. Maybe tell them to restart their computer and then try joining in again. Or
yeah, I don't not quite know what it is I want to do. And my iPad is freezing up, so I'm having a hard time reading their messages. And
do they have a different, like if they're on their, can they switch to a different device? Like if they're on a laptop right now, could they switch to their phone and try linking on then? That might help.
I've mentioned calling in on the telephone. It's just, we've heard from so many people that this is an issue. It just kind of makes me feel something is afoot that's beyond our control. So I'm just wondering what folks want to do. We don't have another platform to use. I'll try to get another platform for next time, like not Zoom, because I've had so many problems with Zoom. But I just don't know exactly what to do to be respectful of Tam's time and everyone else's. Paula, do you mind kind of just holding us over and talking, and then behind the scenes, we'll try to sort out what we're going to do? Paula, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. No, I came in through a kind of a invitation. So if you close and reboot, I'm not sure how to get back in.
That's totally fine. What I'm suggesting is right now, do you mind just holding space for us while we try to sort things out? Just if you mind talking, then it's like, because we're live streaming still and it's a little awkward.
Oh, okay. Oh, sure. Sure. I can hold space. Sure. All right. I didn't know what that meant. Well, I just wanted to organize my thoughts a little bit. So I'm Paula June Bekjajian. I'm a transgender woman. I'm fully transitioned. I really like being myself these days, which wasn't always the case. And one of I've had an easier time of transitioning than I've had dealing with my personal childhood PTSD trauma, which, well, I consider was very severe for myself. So, but nowadays I'm really working on coming back into my authentic self, which in my belief system is we're born our authentic selves, and we kind of wander or are guided out of that by the people who are responsible, and then we get caught up in a construct that is not of our making. Anyways, then we got a choice to move out of that, and that's what I'm doing. So, my family history, which adds a little interesting to this, is my mom was a Holocaust survivor. She was put in a concentration camp at the age of 14, and came out at the age of 18, and got pregnant at the age of 20, and had me at the age of 21. And because of what happened to her and her inability to be a mother, I ended up having attachment disorder and a bunch of other stuff that I've been dealing with. So it was a difficult family post-war. My mother, there was a serviceman that made my mother pregnant, and then she came looking after whoever's talking. Could you mute yourself, please? Because it's hard to talk while you.
That's weird. I was able to join no problem.
Okay. Well, I'll stop talking then. You knock yourself out talking. Okay. So in the 50s, my mom was a communist and was pursued by the FBI, and we had to flee to Cuba on asylum. And that was because she fought for the Rosenbergs, and also very politically activated in the civil rights movement in Chicago, which was, we had a burning cross on our front yard. So all of this, I figured I was in the wrong body at the age of 6. At the age of 7, I had some genital mutilation happen to me, which was, I didn't ask for it. And so it really scrambled me up a lot. And I'm 77 now. And so this all took place a long time ago. Now, trauma's over with, but the result of that trauma is something that I'm still trying to heal. So, so in Cuba, back in the beginning of the revolution, it was actually pretty nice, but they were really backwards. They were homophobic and transphobic and all sorts of phobic. And I was a little white kid out of Chicago, dropped into a Latin community. And I always say it saved my life, but it took a little while for me to catch up. It's a very connected society, and you make long-term friends there, and people look after you. So that was a good part of my journey. So let's see. Eventually, I ended up. They want to do electroconvulsive therapy on me because I was like, being difficult and disruptive, and I don't know. I don't even remember that anymore. So I left Cuba in '67, ended up in Montreal. I didn't want to go to Vietnam, so I just immigrated to Canada and started exploring myself. So in 1967, I was introduced to STP. It was my first hallucinogenic experience, and then LSD. And so during that time, lots of LSD, really good stuff. There was a lab in McGill University, so accessing quality hallucinogens was not a problem. And that's where I started my journey on self-healing. I had a lot of I really felt queer and was exploring that, but my stepfather, who adopted me, was a very narcissistic individual, was a closeted gay man, and while the politics were good, the parenting was crappy. And there was a lot of things that happened that were very disturbing to me, that kind of stunted my growth in exploring my queerness and accepting myself. So that's how I got into hallucinogenics. But I would read the books on that, and about expanding the mind. They're starting to get into transcendental meditation. There was such a pull for self-healing. It's a really interesting thing happens when you're born and you're not parented. So I wasn't parented, period. And so I had to parent myself. And so it was all by trial and mistake and trial and mistake. A lot of risky behavior, lots of times brushes with death. But I have a real strong survival instinct. So while I took myself to the brink, I never took the final plunge. So I'm very happy about that. So I moved from Montreal to Toronto, which is a very avant-garde place at the time I moved there, 69. And then I ended up in British Columbia, which actually, Vancouver, which is actually a very, was at the time, a very open and interesting place to be. But this was all just avoiding dealing with myself, just denial and avoiding a lot of pain and suffering, and taking drugs to mitigate that pain. I couldn't stand it. So I moved here to San Francisco. I moved to San Francisco. That's not where I am right now. In 1982, and I went to get a haircut. I was an MDA, and my barber is a gay man. He said, I was Paul at the time. He said, you ought to go to this thing. It was I guess he saw my queerness. We had a nice conversation. And there was this woman named Tamara Diaghilev who was part of the community in San Francisco. And every week we had a meeting with queer people. And I went to that to start. I felt very comfortable there. There was a guy that I liked, he liked me. So I didn't know if I was, a queer man, but I felt like a woman. Anyways, I didn't know what the hell I was. But I started the journey, and again, all various other stimuli, but a lot of LSD, which I liked the mind expanding part of it. And then I moved into mushroom. Psilocybin was also very organic. So that became my path. So jumping forward a whole bunch of years, I ended up in Fairfax, California. And I was still struggling with mental conditions like ADHD and OCD and rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, and oh, look at that, gender dysphoria too. Oh my God, was that a surprise to me? Not really. And it wasn't a surprise to people I knew. So I started dealing with the gender dysphoria, and I got so tired of talk therapy because there was part of me that wasn't getting healed. And that was the pre-verbal childhood trauma that I had experienced in utero and in the first few years of my life. So I was invited by a therapist to Napa, and they have 10 people of the LGBT. I don't know all the acronym I'm working on. I have dyslexia, so all those letters start jumbling up on me, but our community. And I was invited for ayahuasca, and I went to that, and I thought it would like break the barriers and shields of protection that I knew there was stuff I had buried that I couldn't deal with. It was too hard. So the first experience was I had to get over my disappointment. I expected LSD or mushrooms, and that's not what was delivered. Something altogether was handed to me, and I went, holy shit, this, all the other hallucinogens, my mind is so strong I can control the experiences. it's good, but I've always been in control of that. Ayahuasca, no control. No, but it wasn't that good the first time. The second time I made an agreement with, well, she's Uni, so it's a MEAO inhibitor along with the DMT. And I agreed with her to open up and let things happen. So we got an hour into it. I was puking up my guts and I thought I was going to die. And I'm going, no, 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 I didn't want this. I didn't want this. And she said, Paula June, you asked for this, so you're going to experience what you asked for. So it was a death. It was a death of my previous self, the ego and all the protection and all the crap that I was dragging around in my life that prevented me from doing what I wanted to do, which was be creative and be a woman as I am. And, so it was like really a horrendous experience. And I was left shaking and crying for several days afterwards. I went, oh my God. And then working on integration. Integration is very important. So I started with people. There's several people in our community that do integrative work to be able to talk about this stuff and integrate. So I did all that. And then, about a couple of months later, I said, oh, this has just started. I have to do some more work. So I did some research. And I just was so lucky that there is a temple of the Way of the Light about a couple hours up the river from Iquitos, Peru, with the Shipibo people. And this place was a place that Gabamate, had gone. And
Hey, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We actually are now at a point where we can switch over to the other Zoom. And so I'm just wondering if folks can help Paula, because they had mentioned the ability to move to the new Zoom might be difficult, but it's in the chat. And so we can also email it to you, Paula.
Okay, I can look at
But
the
we
chat.
are switching over now. So I just want to let everyone know if you can copy that, that would be great.
Okay, got it. Just a minute. There it is. Okay, done.